Today on the show, I'm so thrilled to have Vicki Stark join us. Vicki, I first heard about you when, years ago when I actually had a lady called Ashleen on my podcast sharing her story about sudden wife abandonment. And she mentioned how much you had helped her, which I just thought, wow, who is this woman? Who is this Vicki Stark? And I need to look her up. And I started looking at what you did and I thought it was amazing. And then over the years, I've had other women on the show also sharing their stories with sudden wife abandonment who have also referenced you. So I'm thrilled to have you on the show because you're clearly making a huge impact to women in the world. You're an internationally known psychotherapist, a speaker, an author, a divorce recovery expert, the director of the Sedona Counseling Centre of Montreal, which is where you live. Obviously,
Yes.
You're particularly known for your groundbreaking book, Runaway Husbands, which has led you to mentor a worldwide community of women, as I mentioned, recovering from this unexpected divorce. You've also written two other books, My Sister, Myself, and The Divorce Talk, How to Tell the Kids, such an important topic. And then you've edited a fourth, Planet Heartbreak, which is a compilation of 62 stories written by women from your community, which is amazing. You're also a blogger for Psychology Today. You've been a guest on radio and television and speaking at conferences. You're devoted to helping women in the community and love leading retreats. And I'm just so thrilled to have you join me today. Welcome, Vicki.
It is a pleasure to be here, Julia. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No, I'm so happy because, we had you recently talk as a guest in my Thrive Tribe community and the ladies loved it. And it's really something that a lot of women can relate to. And if you've been in this experience and you come across your kind of research and you're like, wow, it's such a oh my goodness,
Yes.
It's not just me moment. It gives me goosebumps just saying it actually, because it's just what a moment to discover you and to discover this, sudden wife abandonment syndrome and go, oh my gosh, there's other people that this has happened to.
Yeah, I mean, you are so right. I think of myself back when my husband left me.
Yes.
And how I was scouring the internet and trying to find anything, and there was nothing. And if I had found my own book, I would have just been, oh my God. I mean, because what women tell me is two things. That when they just stumble across my book in the middle of the night, when they're, sort of just Googling anything, Googling my husband left me or whatever, and they find the whole website and the whole community and the book, they tell me that it makes them feel two things. One is that they're not crazy.
Yes.
And they're not alone.
Yes.
And those are two very profound things. Because everyone feels like I must be the only person in the world to whom this has happened. And there
because
must be
it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, right? And so that's the benefit of stumbling across the Runaway Husbands community, and how that is you really hit the nail on the head. It's so relieving and satisfying for women who have been really lost and alone.
100%. And you kind of got into this through your own experience of having a runaway husband. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, sure. So I had been married for 21 years. And like many of the women in my community, I thought I was in a completely 100% secure relationship with my husband. And
21 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have women in the community who are 40 years out, but nevertheless, he had never, ever said that he was thinking of leaving or that he was unhappy in the marriage. He never had breathed a word of that. And I had written my first book about sister relationships and had done a book tour across America and came home after 23 days on the road. And he, the night that I came home, he came back from work and I said to him, I bought fish. And he said, it's over. And I said, okay, if you don't want fish, I'll make chicken.
Don't be so dramatic.
Fine. Fine, something's wrong with fish. So he said, no, the marriage is over and I'm leaving you right now. And so obviously I was completely shocked and I couldn't figure out what happened. And he did say that night, but then he threw all his stuff into garbage bags and into the trunk of his car and left to move in with his girlfriend. And I had, I'm a marriage counselor. And I had spent, 30 something years as a marriage counselor. So if anyone should see what's going on, it should have been me. But I didn't see what was going on because he gave me absolutely no indication. And on the contrary, he was just loving and supportive and demonstrative and engaged until the day he left. So anyhow, so I had to do a lot of pick myself up and try to figure out what was going on. And then I started hearing from other women to whom this had happened, and realized that that this is not unique, that there is a community of women to whom this has happened. And so I started putting out little ads in local newspapers, and women started filling out my questionnaire, or I started doing interviews. And that's how I got the 400 women who participated in the Sudden Wife Abandonment Project study, which led to the book. So, the good thing about my husband having left me, and I always say to the women who come to my retreats and stuff, let's all write a thank you note to him and say, thank you so much for leaving Vicki so that she could help the rest of us get through this. But the good thing is that, it started me on another path in my life, and I can totally relate to the women that I work with because I've been there. And I know what it feels like, and I suffered terribly in spite of the fact that I am a therapist and have a community of friends who are therapists. It was intense.
If you haven't lived it, then you don't know. And I think what you're doing is amazing because you're leading, by example. You've been through that, so you totally understand that moment of when he said to you, "It's over, and I'm leaving, and I'm moving in with my girlfriend." Like, you just must think to yourself, has our relationship, our marriage been a lie? Where did this come from? And, you mentioned not seeing it. And I suppose they're very good at sort of covering this up, or you have so much trust in the situation that you wouldn't even suspect, you wouldn't even suspect.
Exactly.
That. Yeah.
Yes.
But I'm sure it would make you question what the relationship was.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's always the question that women ask, which is, was he always like this? Was he just playing a role? Was he just using me for the 21 years? Or was it genuine, the things that he said to me up until the time that he left, and that some change just came over him in the past, 6 months or a year or however long it is?
And what's your answer to that? What did you make of your situation? I'm sure they're all different, or maybe they're not. But
look, I mean, I think that my answer is the same for me and for everybody, which is that I really believe that when they were in it, they were in it.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point in life, something shifts inside. And, for a lot of the women in my community who are a little bit older, the men are in their 50s or something, and they start looking ahead and they say, is this all there is? What can I change? I can't change my job. It's too late to get a new job. I can't improve my health, but what can I change? Well, I look over at my wife and she looks like it. She's in her 50s too. Maybe I can change that. And it's often when there is, typically there's an affair partner, and often a much younger affair partner. And that is just so tantalizing that he can't give it up. And so he gets drawn into that relationship. And the more that he looks at the potential of a new life, the more his wife and his family and his old life pales in comparison. And it seems, pretty clear what he wants to do.
That makes so much sense, because, I mean, it would be very hard living a lie for decades.
Yes.
And why would you? Why would you put yourself through that,
Yes.
So
yeah. Sure.
You mentioned, one of the typical of the 10 hallmarks that you talk about of this sudden wife syndrome. And that was the fact that he kind of mentioned it to you when you were doing this really kind of mundane domestic task. And I know you
Yes.
mentioned that's how they often bring it up when you're just in the
Yeah.
middle of doing something, dishes, cooking, whatever, I'm leaving.
Yes.
And that's one of
Yes.
those 10 hallmarks. Would you mind quickly sort of talking about the other 9?
The other 9 hallmarks.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so I have in front of me. So number 1 is prior to the separation, the husband seemed to be, he was really there. It's not like they'd been fighting for years and they've been throwing out the word divorce and that he'd been threatening to leave. No.
It
Prior
seemed
to
like a good relationship.
It seemed like a good relationship, and in many cases, it seemed like an excellent relationship, and he seemed extremely attached. So number 2 is that, like my husband, he never said he was unhappy or thinking of leaving. That's another typical one. And then number 3, you mentioned that the husband typically blurts it out in the middle of, they've gone grocery shopping, or, they're taking the laundry out of the machine or something, or, they're cooking dinner. And he sort of blurts out the fact that, you know what, I can't do this anymore, I'm leaving. And it's very weird. Like, it's not like he says, come into the living room, we have something important to talk about. No, it's often a blurt. He just blurts it out.
Very insensitive.
It's very strange. Yeah. So number 4 is that the reasons for his decision are often weird. When they ask, when the women ask their husband, like, why are you leaving? And he gives an excuse like, I've asked you to clean up the shoes by the front door, but you leave too many shoes by the front door, so obviously I have to leave. My husband said, his daughter from a previous marriage was supposed to get married the previous summer, and she called off her engagement for whatever reason that I had nothing to do with. And he said, oh, if she had gotten married, I wouldn't be leaving. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute, what? Like, how does that compute? What does this have to do with that?
Yes.
So
how are they even
typically
related?
The reasons are like very nonsensical. By the time he reveals his thoughts to his wife, it's a fait accompli. He's not interested in doing marriage counseling. He's not interested in working on the relationship. It's already done. The first she hears of it is when her marriage is already over. Typically, his behavior changes radically. And so he acts like he couldn't care less about her. And even though she's crying and not eating and a mess and in terrible shape, he seems to suddenly have no regard for her whatsoever.
He's cold, uncaring.
He's cold. Yeah. And he may treat her like he's a cold, cruel and vindictive stranger. And so a lot of women feel like he had a brain tumor because he's acting like an alien. He's not himself.
How heartbreaking that must be.
Oh my God. You can only imagine. He shows no remorse and blames his wife and may describe himself as a victim. In almost all cases, the husband has been having an affair. And he makes no attempt to help his wife either financially or emotionally, as if any positive regard he had for her has been completely, extinguished. And then finally, he systematically devalues the marriage. So although, he may have said many times before, and like I had cards from him, and many of the women have cards and letters from him saying, I'm so lucky I met you. You are my rock. You are my life. I worship the day, I found you, all of that stuff. Then he suddenly says, I was never happy and it was never good. And he completely devalues the marriage. So many of these 10 hallmarks are very mystifying, very confusing. Like, how can this be? And so for the women who are grappling with this, they need answers.
100%. It feels like some of the hallmarks that you mentioned almost sound like narcissistic. Is there kind of a correlation between men that do this and having a narcissistic personality disorder, do you think?
Yeah, well, so that's been a big topic in recent years, because for many of the men, they don't appear narcissistic during the marriage, but you only become aware of that narcissistic trait when they leave.
Yeah.
And so there is a subcategory of narcissistic personality disorder called covert narcissism, in which the husband doesn't appear narcissistic, because while he's in the marriage, it suits him. This is what he wants. He wants you to be with him. He's gaining from being with you. And it's only when he suddenly decides, nah, I don't want her anymore, I want somebody else, that covert narcissism becomes visible. So that narcissistic personality trait may have been there all along, but it wasn't obvious because he was comfortable in his role.
Yeah.
But once the role doesn't fit so well anymore, and then you can see how he only cares about himself. And many of the men say, it's my turn now.
Wow.
I've given so much, to the family, and, when is it my turn? Well, it's my turn now. And so as if they really don't care about the family, it was just something that they were doing.
Goodness me. So how on earth do people, I know you talk about this a little bit on your website, but healing and recovery from this, and you talk about these transformational stages. Can you chat about that for a little bit?
Yeah. So really it's a pretty clear progression that women go through. And I developed these 7 transformational stages based on weather
I
patterns.
love it. I love it.
So that that initial day when, November 7th, 2006, when my husband said, I don't want fish, I'm leaving. Then I was thrown into the tsunami phase, where you just have no idea what's happening. You're turned upside down, you're drowning, you can't figure out what's going on. And you're just completely turned around. And that's the initial phase. Typically women stop eating, they can't sleep, they're crying all the time, they're just trying to make sense of something that's basically nonsensical. And then they slowly segue out of that to the tornado phase, where they're just spinning and they're obsessing. How could this happen? What did I do? What did he say? Looking for answers. And it's not quite as bad as a tsunami phase, but it's pretty intense. Yeah. And then they move into the thunderstorm phase, where sometimes they might be walking along, and even though it's cloudy and there's clouds in the sky and it's raining, it's sort of tolerable. But every once in a while, they get a new piece of information that totally screws them up. And that's the bolts of lightning, or the thunder that comes episodically from time to time, but they're sort of got their feet on the ground and are moving along. And following thunderstorm is the ice storm phase. And I always say that people in Australia can't relate to this, but the ice storm phase, is when the world is frozen and everything is cold, and you feel like you're not making much progress. It's the longest phase, and you're just surviving. You're going through the motions. You're living, but in a very altered kind of way. And then slowly, little by little, things start to soften up. You go into the sun showers, where it's raining sometimes, but sunny other times. And then the early spring morning, and finally into the summer day. And so there is this progression that takes place pretty, it's not totally linear. You can bounce back and forth when you get more and more information. But what happens during the recovery process is that it's a process of putting the pieces back together and figuring out, how do I understand this? How did this happen? And what was happening? Because you don't know what was really going on. The time when your husband went on that business trip and was gone for a week, and you had trouble reaching him in his hotel room for some reason. Was he really with that woman from the office? And little by little you'll say, oh yes, right, he was with her. And you start to put the pieces together, and that's a process, and that takes months or years. But little by little, as you start to figure out what was happening in your life, that understanding is very fundamental to recovery.
I think it's great that you've mapped this out. It's very similar to sort of the grief cycle, I guess, but it gives women hope, because when you're in that moment, just like any sort of regular single mom who's, become a single mom and sort of not planned on it,
Yep.
A lot of the women in that moment, I think, how will I ever recover from this? How will I ever move forwards? Something
Yes.
that I love, that you talk about is that, and I've got the same kind of attitude, that things happen for a reason and that it's a gift and you can use this as an opportunity. And I love how you sort of see a crisis like this as an opportunity for growth and an opportunity for change and an opportunity for something better that you might not even be aware of yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what happens in any crisis, and particularly in a crisis of this magnitude, is that you're forced to work on yourself. You're forced to try to meditate. You're forced to try to manage your anxiety. And in that being forced to do that, you develop skills that perhaps you didn't have before, because you need to get through this. So for example, I was just, speaking to this woman, or earlier on, I had spoken to this woman who said that when her husband left, she put Post-it notes all over her house that said, "Let it go." Because she's obsessing and obsessing and obsessing and obsessing, and it's driving her crazy. And so she had to remind herself, let it go. So in that process of learning how to stop obsessing and open your hands and just let it go, you've gained a skill that you didn't need to have before, because you were never in this level of a crisis. So there are many different ways in which you have to fight in order to feel better, in order to keep taking care of your children, in order to get to work every day. You have to, say to yourself, come on, Vicki, get up, get dressed. You can't lie in bed. Come on, you got to keep going. And so you build this resilience through the necessity of keeping going, keeping living, and, fighting the negativity.
Yeah, I love that. And I suppose having kids, and people in my community, they're all mothers. You are forced to get up because life's got to go on. Kids, they want breakfast and they got to go to school, and you don't have the opportunity to just lie in bed and feel sorry for yourself for weeks and months on end. You've got to get on with it. But that must be a very hard thing to, and I'm sure this is a huge topic, but maybe just very briefly, if you could mention, like, how do you talk to your kids about what's happened when you don't even know what's happened? How do you explain, like, why their father has left, so suddenly, when you don't even know? You have no clue. You have no clue why.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a book called The Divorce Talk, How to Tell the Kids. So the book is exactly about that. It's about how to tell children that their parents are getting divorced. And really, I interviewed 100 children, or 100 adults who were children when their parents divorced, to hear from them, what it is that they wanted. And so many children said that they really wanted their parents to be honest, but not too honest. They wanted enough of honesty, but they really didn't want to hear all the dirty parts and all the really crummy parts and all of that stuff. They didn't want to hear all that. So I think that you can be honest in as much to say that, Dad, decided that he wanted to move out. I'm really heartbroken, and I'm really confused. I don't really totally understand what's going on. I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. And, I really want to hear from you guys, you kids, what you think about this news, and how does that make you feel? And did you sort of think that, this might happen? Had you ever thought about that? You want to give the child lots of opportunity to talk, and you don't want to out-talk them. You don't want to give them a big discussion. And the other thing that I write about in my book is you don't want to cheer them up. The tendency, the surprising thing is that for most of the people who were interviewed in my book, the conversation they had with their parents, where they learned about their parents' divorce, was 10 minutes or less. And often the parent will say something like, you're going to see, it's not so bad. You get to have 2 rooms. You're going to have 2, sets of Christmas presents. And, they try to cheer them up when the child might be crying or saying, why, or I don't want him to go.
They're not ready to hear the benefits right in that moment.
You know what? Because there are no benefits.
Yeah.
There are no benefits. And so the children want you to be able to empathize and say, yes, I know you're sad. You're entitled to be sad. This is sad. Of course it's sad. Without saying, but look at it this way. You'll get this and you'll get that. No, because that's not consistent with what the child is feeling at the moment.
Yeah.
So you want to stay in tune with what the child is feeling at the moment. Later on, you can move away from that. But initially, you really want to stay very connected to the child's lived experience at that moment.
Yeah. Amazing. Tell us a little bit about, before we kind of wrap up, tell us a little bit about your retreats and what they're like, because I can imagine, getting a whole bunch of ladies together who've been through this must be so exciting for them. Like,
oh my God. I can't tell you how wonderful it is.
Yeah.
Before COVID, I did 2 retreats a year, one in Montreal in September and one in Sedona, Arizona in May. Mm-hmm. The Montreal retreat was a weekend retreat, and people came from all over, including sometimes from Australia, amazing, from Britain, from France, from Europe, all over the United States and Canada. And how the women bonded in just 2 days is like mind-blowing. But they'd all had the same experience, and so they could relate to each other. And we had a wonderful experience. And Sedona is 5 days. And it's a smaller group, and it's really so much fun. And it's a mix of workshops working on recovery and also exploring, going out hiking or going up the mountains or doing different things together, or going with a shaman to the desert. It's really super cool. And so the friendships that are made are really rock solid, and it's really wonderful. They're great. So since COVID, we've been online, and it's even, you'd be surprised, but having everybody on the screen means you can see everybody at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not like being in a room where one woman's sitting over there and the other woman's sitting, and you can't really see when she's talking or can't hear her, and everyone bonds incredibly, even on the online groups. Yeah. But now I'm slowly segueing out, and I'm toying with the idea of another Sedona retreat in person in October, obviously. So it's just a great experience. And I think one of the important thing about our community and our Facebook group is that they have each other.
Yeah.
So that I give a certain amount of workshops and group therapy and individual sessions and all sorts of things, but I can't be with them day and night. But if they're having a hard time at 2:00 in the morning, they go in the Facebook group, and there's somebody somewhere in the world is up. Yeah. And the support it's priceless.
Yeah, it sounds totally priceless. Well, Vicki, I'm so happy to have chatted with you again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Julia. It was really great. You're a great interviewer.
Oh, thank you.
It's a pleasure to talk with you.
I love talking with you. And if you're watching or you're listening and you want to find out more about Vicki, you can go to runawayhusbands.com. She's also got an amazing Facebook group, which is for the community, Runaway Husbands Community. And she's got her YouTube channel. And she's also got the first chapter of her book, Runaway Husbands, for free available. And I'll pop all those links in the show notes for the listeners, Vicki.
Great, Julia.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.